Welcome to the Life Science and Marketing Podcast, where we discuss marketing and career insights and tips with leading experts from across the globe. Let's join our host, Paul Avery, CEO of BioStrata, as he chats with our next life science marketing guest.
Today, we welcome Natasha Zarach to the podcast. Natasha is currently International Head of Marketing at Veolia, where she's worked for over a decade, holding a number of positions, which includes Head of Digital Marketing and Communications within the company's ELGA team, which delivers water purification systems for laboratories. And that's how Natasha and I met back in the day. She is also a qualified yoga instructor. Natasha, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you here. Obviously, I've given the listeners a little flavour for who you are, but I could never do your story justice. Why don't you give us some insights into your story to get us going?
Oh, gosh, my story. I'd love to say I knew exactly what I wanted to do from an early age, but I didn't. Entirely sure I still do. Kind of fell into the technology industry by accident, and I did a number of roles across product management, sales, and marketing, both in the UK and overseas, which was good fun. I kind of reached a stage where I was done with binary. You know, I wanted something more human than ones and zeros. So I moved to Veolia, where I've been, as you say, for over a decade. Wow, that makes me feel old. Veolia is one of the most influential environmental groups worldwide, and that really appealed to me. Then I worked for a really tiny business unit within the group, focusing, as you say, on science and healthcare markets. That's kind of where I ended up. I'd love to say, as I said, I had a vision and a path, but I didn't. It's definitely one that's more flowy, shouldn't say, like water.
How apt.
Yes.
Highly pure water, I would imagine, as well.
Of course. Unlike your squash that you've got.
Oh, no. I was going to hide the squash, and now you brought it up. I'm going to have to put it in camera for the video viewers. Tell us about your current role then, because you're International Head of Marketing at Veolia now. Are you still focusing mostly on the science side, or is it more broad?
Yes, it is mainly on the science and healthcare markets, but we are, I guess, getting more segmented within those markets. So we're developing, obviously, the pharma verticals, food and beverage. So it's expanding, still within healthcare and science, but becoming more segmented. But that's probably driven as much by our organizational structure as trying to connect with the right people,
right,
from a customer point of view.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What about outside of work? What are you passionate about outside of work?
Yoga, for one. Ironic, I have a friend who often yells at me, "We just sit still for a minute," and I think that's probably why yoga is good for me. I probably struggle to sit still. I'm always doing something, always learning. I think at the moment my current new thing is pottery. So but for me, it's kind of turned into a bit of a metaphor. For me, you know, everything's a bit wonky, but mostly functional.
That's a life aspiration.
I've achieved it.
I love it.
Yeah. So it's often, exploring something new, learning something new, which I guess again suits marketing really, because it's forever changing.
Absolutely. What about a story about you that not many people might know? I'd be interested to hear.
Yeah. I'm sorry, that's still censored. That's the sort of question that you ask and your mind goes completely blank. Thank you, Paul. Not many people know. So the icebreaker question, how I'd answer that would be, I was once invited on stage in Vegas by David Copperfield, and I was part of the show, and he made me disappear on stage.
Wow.
Yeah. Obviously, I'm not allowed to tell you how it worked, because what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Especially in the magic circle, which you are now very clearly a part of.
Yeah. So that was,
That's so cool.
Yeah, it was quite cool. But a little bit weird.
Yeah, I can quite imagine.
Yeah.
Well, whenever I ask that question, you never quite know what you're going to get. And I would not have guessed that one. So I appreciate you sharing that with us, Natasha. That's brilliant. Um, what about, let maybe we talk science for a bit, because I think certainly when I think back to some of the projects we've worked on over the years, pure water is one of those things that it's like a tried and tested, essential ingredient of most experiments. But once you actually peel the surface back, you can see some really cool stuff that we wouldn't be able to do if we didn't have access to, really ultra pure water. So what are some of the sort of science stories or areas that have most interested you over the years in the projects you've worked on?
I guess the one that stands out for me is I was lucky enough to work on a case study with some great people at I think it's the Italian National, got to get this right, the Italian National Antarctic Research Program at the University of Venice. And because I spent quite a bit of time with them, and I just kind of really got into what they were doing. So they used our equipment, they used pure water within their labs on research, say that again, research ships in Antarctica, as well as in their labs in Venice. So they were taking ice core samples, still back to water, and analysing those, as well as sort of marine snow and aerosol samples down to ultra trace levels of substances. And so they were looking really at our impacts latterly on the sort of pristine environment within the Antarctic environment, but also the biomass burning events from thousands of years ago. So just absolutely fascinating work and great spending some time in their labs. So, our equipment there really is super vital because they're analysing water effectively, or at least the ice core samples.
Yeah, they can't afford to detect something that's in their reagents that they're using by accident and then ascribe it to the sample. That would be disastrous. Interesting. I can't believe. Do you know what I love about that as well? A laboratory on a boat on a sailing vessel. Like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get to go on the vessel. I'd love to. I mean, it's definitely somewhere I'd like to visit. But the visiting their labs was absolutely fascinating because obviously everything's really low temperature. So I had to basically get up dressed in a moon suit, complete with moon boots, to actually go into the lab and see all the core samples and how they were using the equipment. So yeah, it was fascinating.
Oh, that sounds so cool. I would love to see a picture of that. Everyone in their moon suits.
Yeah, I look like a Oompa Loompa, I think.
That's awesome. On the science front, is there any area of science at the moment, maybe you're working in it, maybe not, that just particularly excites you and you're kind of keen to see how things are going to play out?
I guess, and it's probably linking a couple of things here. I'm really doing quite a lot around pharma, drug discovery, AI and drug discovery, huge things. Just how is that going to play out for what is typically, a 10 to 15 year process, and the costs are astronomical. So you're obviously much more of an expert on AI than I am. And, simultaneously, it absolutely petrifies me and excites me. So I don't really know where that's going from a personal perspective, or really, I guess, a wider aspect of the marketing. But the possibility of AI being able to, reduce the cost of bringing a drug to market anyway, but actually to find cures for rare medical conditions, because now it makes them viable to do that. So from that perspective, really quite fascinating to watch how that's going to pan out.
I agree. That's such a cool area, and I think it will also impact in unexpected ways.
Yeah.
Such as thinking of connections between biological factors or even like apparently unrelated diseases, and just looking at things in a way a human wouldn't.
Yeah.
To be able to surface new insights and new drug targets and things that maybe we wouldn't have sort of thought to go after. I think that's going to be cool because, as you, I think, very rightly said, we're still waiting for that drug discovery paradigm shift, aren't we? It still costs a load, takes forever. Most programs fail. they still fail too late when loads of time and money's been spent on them. And if AI can give us a leg up and help us get over some of those challenges, I think the world's going to be a happier place.
It is, and that's the as I say, I'm excitedly curious and petrified of AI, because there are areas of our lives that it's going to impact positively. What happens on the negative side, I don't think about. I can see my head on that one.
It's kind of a bit PBD at the moment, that one, isn't it? And I'm not sure. There's lots of debate, but I'm not sure anyone really knows.
No,
if I'm honest. All right, let's talk. We've talked a bit of life. We've talked a bit of science. Let's talk a bit about marketing. But I think before we get into that, I'd love to get your take on any advice that you'd give to someone just starting out in life science marketing.
Gosh, I guess be curious. For me, it's the one aspect I always look for. If I'm interviewing somebody for a role or something, is do they have curiosity? And don't be just curious about, the marketing as a business function. Be curious about your entire organization. Take the opportunity to go and work in other departments, even if it's got nothing to do with marketing. Go, build products. If they're here, go build a product. Go work in tech support. Go out on the road with sales, because ultimately, as a marketeer, you're selling, you're promoting, and you are everything in that organization. And so for me, it's always important to understand the bigger picture and apply that to customers as well. Don't just look at the labs, look at everything else they're trying to do. Because it's important to make those connections.
That's really sage advice. Thank you for sharing that.
Sage.
Sage. Yeah, sage and onion advice, that one. You're clearly very passionate about what you do. So I wonder, what's the bit that you love the most about what you do?
What gets me out of bed is connecting people. It's probably one of the things I did think about in a sort of a career progression. Was I've always enjoyed working in international roles. I like the fact that, one day I'm trying to figure out how to connect with, a lab manager in China, the next day in Germany. So the variety of that as a challenge is fascinating, just from a marketing tactical point of view, but also culturally, understanding the differences there. So for me, that's the thing that's always really interesting. Plus the fact I'm doing it in an environment, an environment that's really fascinating from a science point of view. The advancement in sciences keeps it fresh, as well as the fact that, marketing changes every 2 minutes or so.
Yeah, especially at the moment. That's really interesting. And I do think people do different things in different countries, and you've got those cultural aspects. So what do you think are the biggest challenges about that?
Well, biggest challenges of the differences.
Yeah, and trying to communicate to people in different countries, understand the culture, how they apply your technologies in different scientific environments.
I think the biggest challenge there is don't localize, culturalize. It's really easy to take what we've done here and translate it, push it out and say, off you go. We've given you some fantastic content. Go and make a campaign in your local market. It just doesn't work that way. You must really culturalize what you're trying to do, rather than just straightforward translate it, if that makes any sense.
Oh, it really does. I've never heard it put like that before, but now that you've said it, intuitively it makes sense. Can you maybe give an example or elaborate a bit to try and help the listeners understand where the key differences lie?
Right. So I'm just back from China. I went to go and spend some time with my colleagues out there, who fantastic, haven't seen them for a good number of years for obvious reasons. And we're looking at running campaigns in their market. And it's probably the best example of culturalization versus localization. Obviously, the language is very different, but how they use social media is vastly different. Not obviously, they don't have any of the the Google, LinkedIn, Twitter platforms that we have here. They have something like WeChat. So WeChat transcends business and personal. So if I've connected with somebody on WeChat in a business environment, I'm just as likely to see exactly what he's doing or she's doing at the weekend. And so those lines are completely blurred.
Wow.
So from a perspective of trying to get your head around the content you're putting out there, it's different. There's no demarcation between business and private on sort of something like a WeChat platform.
That is fascinating, because we're often having conversations in the more Western markets around LinkedIn is an obvious go-to as a professional platform. And in essence, we're B2B, although in science, especially when targeting your academics, I guess it's a bit blurred because it's more of a vocation for a lot of people. But having debates around, should we use Facebook? Is that the right type of platform? Whereas it sounds like when you're using a platform like WeChat, you can't choose. Like you're getting the whole person, business and personal, and then you have to think about how you're going to apply your messaging and the content you create to that platform.
Yep, absolutely right. It's a big challenge, and particularly because the last few, I think LinkedIn's now just about to exit or has exited from China. So there is no, there's no markers for us me as a marketeer to take anything I've done outside of China into China. So we're starting from scratch. We've got to also look at, interesting things about, I love white space when I'm designing something. Chinese, the Japanese, they like to fill everything. So just from a visual point of view, our websites have to look very different. And how we drive traffic to it obviously is going to be different. So yeah, good challenge.
I love that. Yeah. And the design principles. I remember trying to port some Japanese sales collateral into English, not just the translation of it, but lots of colors, lots of images, lots of everything, like a full page, I think, to the Western design eye, almost too much information. But as you say, in Japan and China, if your brain is used to interpreting information that way, it actually looks wrong to you when it's not that way, in the same way as it probably would look wrong to a Western eye when they're in the other way. I know you've done a fair bit of work in this area. What have you learned, or what sort of tips could you give around trying to market better in China?
I don't know. Ask me in a couple of months. I'd have to go back to the culturalization versus localization. It is absolutely key. That for me is probably the most vital one. When you're marketing into the science environment, there it is a little bit odd because there's a significant number of, if you're working with international companies based in China, the laboratory managers, the PhDs have actually often been educated overseas. So you kind of get this weird blend between the two. So again, keep that in mind. You do sometimes need to do, depending on who you're targeting, to make sure you're following up in English as well as in the local Chinese language. So you need both, because they'll check both.
Right.
Yeah. And as I say, I think just keeping mindful that you have to go back to square one. All the principles and the theory are the same, just the players are very different.
Right.
You have to have a website and a server located on the other side of the great firewall of China, as they call it. You can't really do anything from this side. So the more networking, the more people you have inputting into your understanding of that landscape, the better.
Fascinating stuff. Well, thank you for sharing that, Natasha. If we look a bit more broadly, what do you think are the most hard things about life science marketing? What are the biggest challenges we face as life science marketers, outside of that massive one that you've already posed for us?
I guess authenticity. And I say that because, I've worked in a number of different industries outside of the science. I don't have a STEM background. And I've worked outside of the life science market. It's fair to say scientists are the toughest people to market to. and rightly so, their psyche is to question everything. And if you're not another scientist, if you're in sales or in marketing, you know, you don't really stand much of a chance. So it's making sure that as marketeers, we are genuinely authentic about the content we're putting out there. Is it genuinely going to help that person? It's things that if you start talking about greenwashing, will just be uncovered in minutes, and you lose that. You lose that reputation. So authenticity, I think, is probably key to making sure that you're connecting the right content. Don't put stuff out there for the sake of it. It's just you'll be crash and burn.
Yeah. They're particularly discerning as an audience, and they spot rubbish a mile away. And I think as humans, we've got very good at seeing veiled sales pitches wrapped up in content that's actually just a sales pitch. But my goodness, scientists, if they see that, they almost have like an allergic reaction to the brand, right? So you've got to really market with that in mind. We've worked on a number of campaigns over the years, some of my favorites. Yeah. I'd be interested to know what's been your favorite marketing campaign or strategy that you've implemented over the years.
It's funny you should say that, because it was actually, and I can't actually remember the details, but you and I met when we were a lot younger. BioStrata had a few people in it. I don't think it was yourself and Claire and I think a couple other people.
Yeah.
And I was working for a business unit that was effectively a fairly traditional B2B manufacturing business unit. But our challenge was we had to promote the brand globally with, 3 people from a small office in the UK. And so we took the step to move our predominantly offline budget and campaign activity to all online, pretty much. I think about 70% of it went online. And I can't remember the details of it, but I do remember sitting watching, live tracking on landing pages, because a campaign was happening as opposed to, an event that takes months. You deliver it and you have no idea really what's coming after that. And so for me, it was the first online campaigns that, BioStrata and my team worked on. I just would love to be able to say I can remember the details of it, but I can't.
I love those as well. I remember in a meeting you saying to me, water's really important, Paul. We've got to make water sexy. That always resonates with me.
Yeah.
Because it's true, right? I think the problem when you've got an unsung hero in the laboratory is it becomes something that maybe people don't pay attention to, but when it goes wrong, goodness me, they know about that.
It absolutely, and that's always been one of the challenges of the promoting the brand. We're a niche brand. We don't dilute. Sorry, I had to get that in. Cut that out. We don't dilute into other areas. We are absolutely experts on water, but you don't notice it if it's not broken. You will not know. It's like walking in and turning the light switch on. As soon as it's broken, then the lab can stop working. If you look at clinical lab, for example, no water, no tests. And a clinical lab puts thousands of tests through on a regular basis. The impact when you look further down the line of not getting results is, something you don't really want to think of. So it is the unsung hero. We'll keep pushing it. We'll still try to find a way to make water sexy, or at least just raise the awareness within the market. I'm not sure we can ever really attain sexy.
So I think we got close. If I remember, and I think for the listeners as well, inbound marketing, content marketing, like this pretty much dominates in the life sciences now. But when we were bringing content-driven approaches, inbound marketing didn't really exist in the life sciences, right? We were kind of forging the way, and we got to have a lot of fun with it, thankfully, because I think of the creative dynamism in your team who were well up for it. Plus, we were in a market where if you can say something interesting and valuable and you can say it in an interesting way, you can really stand out. And I always remember some of the infographics and comics that we did that had, in the end, some really massive players copying what we were doing. And I remember that as always being a big marker of, are we on the right track here? Yes, because the big players are noticing it and they're imitating it, which is for me is usually, what did they say? Imitation is the greatest form of flattery. So that was fun.
We'll go with that.
Absolutely. What would be your single best marketing tip that you've learned over the years that you pass on to other marketers?
Prepare for podcasts. Don't wake up in the morning and go,
I've got a podcast interview today. Crumbs.
My first podcast, I have to say I'm a podcast virgin up till now. So interesting process. I guess be willing to change and experiment. Like we did switching, offline to our online strategy, and stay curious. Sorry, that's two, not single. Best marketing tip, but yeah, be willing to change and experiment, and stay curious, because if you're curious about the people you're trying to connect to, it just makes for a better campaign, or it makes for a better approach to what you're trying to do on a day-to-day basis.
Awesome. One more question. What do you think are the biggest missed opportunities for life science companies when it comes to marketing?
It's probably not so much about life science, but marketing in general. It's about data and connectivity. One of the things I loved about working with online is that you can measure what we did. And before that, it was a bit of a dark art. But now, unfortunately, we have so much data in our organizations, but it's not always connected. So it makes it harder for us to build pictures, right pictures of who we're trying to target, what we can continue to help and be authentic about and be relevant about with the people that we've connected with. So it's both an art and a science. The art drove it for many years, but the science really came into its own when digital marketing came along. So really it's making sure that you're better at managing and connecting the data, and being, kind to our IT departments, who I'm always beating up, because that's one of our problems, is making sure that we're connected.
I think that's so. I mean, on the one hand, it's super hard because we end up with data in so many disparate systems and we need to connect them. On the other hand, I think moving data between systems is as easy as it's ever been. And then what we do is we then make it even harder for ourselves by collecting ever more data in different formats, structured in different ways. And so it's like we're on a bit of a merry-go-round in terms of we've got some of the technologies we need, but now we're collecting even more data and making it even harder for ourselves. So now we need to upgrade our technologies, and the never-ending spin.
Yes, I think sometimes less is more.
Yeah. Pulling out, seeing the wood for the trees, as they say, right? And trying to really being able to figure out what's the important part. Look, I've really appreciated your time, Natasha, today. Thank you so much for joining us. If people are interested to connect with you or speak with you about anything you've mentioned today, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Well, if you're in China, on WeChat, apparently.
Indeed.
I've just set up. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to be prepared to receive. And LinkedIn's probably the best way. And with a name like mine, I'm not that difficult to find.
We can drop a link in the show notes just to make it even easier for people. Other than that, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it's been fun. It's nice to take some time out and talk rubbish at you.
No rubbish, but lots of talk, which I appreciate. Thanks, Natasha. See you soon.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Life Science and Marketing Podcast. For your regular dose of cutting-edge life science marketing insights, don't forget to subscribe. Join us again in 2 weeks for another engaging expert discussion.